Hello, Dr. Dixon. Lewis Weber here. Thanks so much for replying to my email. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to share this video with you of some of the work that I've been doing in Sarasota County Schools over the last 10 years. It's an extension of work that I've been doing as a behavioral consultant over the last, 35 years. Much of the time, 20 years spent in business consultation. A lot of the measures and the concepts of performance scorecards come from business models and business consulting. So I wanted to start here with the 20,000 foot view, so to speak, of the behavioral system that I have constructed because TPS, Total Progress System, is a component of that. And I'm going to take a look here at the components of the behavioral system, and then we'll move up to this model. And so you can see each of the 8 elements of the model that we work on. And these are the boundary conditions. The idea here is that each day brings new initiatives, but all of our initiatives on the behavioral front, that is, are going to fit somewhere in these components. And if there's an area that does not fit in these components, I would simply just add another circle. And so everything that I do and the work that I do with principals and the district personnel and teachers and students, everyone in the behavioral model, every action will fit in here somewhere, and TPS is one of those components. So we have the obviously functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan, the PBIS, mental health, crisis, social emotional skills, language is kind of a catch-all for verbal behavior, and academics figures in there, obviously. And so if we take this radial model and we rotate it on the axis here and stack it up this way, I've used what's called Zome tool, Z-O-M-E. And the Zome tool has very interesting software. It's also a physical model, so I actually have uh, a plastic model. It's a very interesting building tool. And so I take this radial pattern and I stack it up to show that each of these components has a relationship to each of the performers. And I list 5 categories. We can also list individual performers, and there's other performers that are going to relate to all of this, such as the attorneys and community members and so forth. So the idea here is that, well, let's take TPS because we're going to be spending some time on that, and we'll say that that's the TPS module right there, component. Uh, that that TPS component is going to relate to students, it's going to relate to teachers, it's going to relate to administration, and so forth. So every component uh, relates to everyone. In fact, all of these balls connect in all sorts of ways. I only show the primary connections because it would just become a blob of lines, very difficult to understand. So these are the primary connections. The idea is that silos in this model are very important because it's a component as it relates to each of the performers. And at the horizontal level, each performer is going to need to take a look at and integrate their actions with these different components. How each performer responds to each of these components brings us up to these factors. And these are the categories of factors that have over the years become very important in developing useful interventions. And obviously you can read it, but emotions and maturity, outcomes and feedback, those are our contingencies. I try not to use too much behavioral jargon in my work. Verbal relational network, that is a bit jargonistic, but this is all about RFD. And relational frame theory has become so important to my work over the last 10 years. It was a major expansion of my skill set when I came across the original Purple Book, as I know it's referred to as. Culture and community, trauma and toxic experience, that has become an increasingly relevant part of the work I do because students are coming into school at an early age, already experience considerable trauma. is a catch-all for the skills and competencies that must be learned. And this addresses some of the neurological components, the relationship between sympathetic and parasympathetic responding, and so forth. So that affects choice and action. Now, the verbal relational network then, of course, links to the components of AIM, the hexaflex, and of course, this is directly from your book. This is also going to be connecting in many other ways to the positive behavior intervention support. And so with that, I'd like to now go ahead and link or shift to a TPS and show you how this is now integrated with TPS measures. And as I had mentioned, TPS is the core of this network of information sharing, because we have to be able to measure performance, right? And so measurement is becoming increasingly viewed as communication as I continue to move into an information network approach to the behavioral system, because components must talk to each other, and the communication of measurement is what TPS is going to offer. And that's become a very big issue because we have been spending, well, the last 10 years developing this measurement system. So now it's going to function in still more uh, uh, useful ways as well as we bring AIM into the program. But let's go ahead and go into TPS. So this is now version 789. I just started counting it 10 years ago, and there's been 789 improvements. And this is an extensive Excel application. I chose Excel because all classrooms, at least in Sarasota County schools, have Excel on their computer. So it was a very convenient platform to develop data. And also it was easy for teachers to understand how to enter the data. Um, it's because TPS is a system, sometimes it's hard to decide where to jump into it. I happened to be on the data entry page. This was something that originally connected to me when I was reading the AIM book. And so we're here, we might as well spend a little bit of time here, and then we'll go through some of the other things that TPS does. So the idea is that measurement of frequency, duration, latency, the classic behavioral measures is not at all not only convenient, it's basically impossible for a teacher to do, particularly at a center school where teachers have maybe 8 or 9 students, all whom have behavior intervention plans. The other problem with frequency is, well, and duration is more of a, I guess, theoretical interest for me, is that frequency does not enable the measurement of intensity. And particularly in a center school with a lot of behavioral issues, the intensity of behavior is a very important measure of progress. And so, although there can be a criterion value in frequency, such as hit of this magnitude, that's very difficult to administrate. When is a touch? When does a touch become a hit? But also, it doesn't show enough variation. It shows variation over time in the counting, but it doesn't show variation in terms of the intensity. And so I developed TPS um, module originally with frequency and duration or latency as well. But then I moved to this rating system, which has become the better mousetrap, so to speak. And data collection is not a problem in Sarasota County schools. And the reason why is because these rubrics have been established for what is a 1, what is a 2, and a 3, and a 4. And armed with that rubric, teachers can, at the end of each academic block, record a 0 through 4 rating for each of these increasing targets and each of these decreasing targets. And all this is, I'm going to explain a little bit as we move along. But the idea here is that during each of these recording periods, and this is set up to have 2 recording periods, a midday conference, 2 more recording periods, end of day conference, and then we can also track transitions in the morning and afternoon and rate those as well. And at the end of each recording period or academic block, if it was to be set up that way, we can simply go period 1 through period 10. The teacher evaluates the student. Now, this has been set up using, as I had mentioned in my email, the Positive Behavior Intervention Support ROAR system. So it's ROAR because the mascot is the panther, and they chose ROAR for respect, on task, acceptance, and responsibility. Acceptance, of course, is going to be the link to the AIM uh, uh, program, and that was a big deal for me when I found out that they were going to use acceptance. I was like, okay, well, that's a great word. Now they chose it because of acceptance of other students' challenges or disabilities. For me, acceptance is that plus the entire AIM curriculum. So that was a wonderful connection, and the principal, excuse me, really appreciates that idea of using AIM curriculum to teach acceptance. Now, we also have decreasing target behaviors, and these are behaviors we would like to see at the 0 level. So we want 4s here, we want 0s here. Now the rating scale is just that. It's a scale, it's not a good or bad, so it's a magnitude scale. And the magnitude is based on 3 dimensions: frequency, duration, and intensity. And so the rubric that we establish separately from TPS gives teachers the information they need to be able to categorize the observations into these 4 categories. So verbal aggression, a 4 would be denoted as a constant berating or use of extreme forms of profanity and so forth. A 3 would be less, and a 2 would be less. So the rubric descriptions for each of these categories touches on a frequency, a duration, sometimes latency, but definitely intensity measure so that teachers can, at the end of the academic block, evaluate the performance of the student. So 0s are desired here, 4s are desired here, X's are where we're not going to be using the data at that particular moment. And so in this sample data, it was originally designed without transitions, so we didn't collect data for these rows, but if we did, these X's would not be here. In fact, let's just put some X's here, make a little correction there. This data set was from another student that has been repurposed for this demo. Over here, we can see notes for Pete, and the academic block or recording period is associated with that. So that row is for each of these different uh, notes. They're associated that way. And here's where, at the end of the day, teacher can put a note to the parent that's not relating to any particular academic block or recording period. At the end or throughout the day, anytime you enter data, percentages are computed based on data that are entered. There's no penalty for blanks. And so this means 50% of the rating points have been earned for respect, and 46% of the rating points have been earned for on task and so forth. Acceptance 38%. If these were all 4s, these numbers would be 100%. And so we can see here for verbal aggression, Pete earned 29% of the possible rating points. Again, we want those to be 0s. So that's how data are entered into TPS. It's very efficient. So much more to it, as you can see on the bottom. And this list goes on of tabs, and I'm going to go through a few of these, give you an idea of the utility of this kind of data. You'll note also that the days of the school year are pre-entered, and that's a very convenient thing. With that, efficiency is the bottom line value of TPS. And so anything that I can do to make data collection more efficient has been entered into TPS. And I'm going to show you some other things as well. So dates, given that we know the dates of the school year, the calendar is well established. Before the school year starts, I enter those dates into TPS. And so when a teacher gets a TPS template, all of the school year, the dates of the school year have been pre-entered. I'm going to scroll down to a fresh page, like right here, and the X's have been taken out since we're going to be recording transitions at this point. There are still a lot of cells to enter, even though we're not recording individual occurrences of things such as with frequency or timing behaviors. It's still a lot of data to enter, and so this is an auto entry feature. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate it first, and I'll put a P in there because that means a perfect day, or also populate. And what that does is it puts all fours here and all zeros here for a perfect day. And then what we can do is change the values that were not perfect. Now, you could put the P there and change the values, or we can change the values and then put the P. So let's say during recording period 3, respect was a little bit lower, and acceptance was lower, and so forth. And maybe there was some verbal aggression and maybe some physical aggression to a person. And then we can put some kind of note here as to what was going on. And then I put the P there, and that populates the data around that. So it makes for very efficient data collection. At any time, I can scroll down or up to see prior data. It's just part of the Excel file. And the P, as you can see, has been used extensively here, and it's very efficient. Now, this is data for one student. I'm going to make this smaller so that you can see the organization. So here's student 1, here's student 2, here's student 3. It is a conventional flat file. And what I have found is that teachers like to be able to see it that way, as opposed to a database where data exists in a cloud format, and it's viewed through a report. Here's the data is directly accessible, and teachers like that. So we can scroll to the right, and we have here Corey Anders' data entry. So that's the basic idea of TPS, and it's very similar to the data sheet that was in AIM. Now, at this point, I'd like to share a few of the very interesting things that we can do with TPS, because I think it could be generally useful to people who want to use AIM. So at this point, I'm going to go to the Setup tab and show how this all gets arranged. So here we can put up to 10 recording periods for the 12 students that are managed in this one TPS file. And these are default recording periods, but we can always go to data entry and change any of these recording periods right here for that particular student. So we're not locked into a particular schedule. So this is just the default. Here we have the teacher's name, this antecedent to behavior challenge I'm going to reflect on in just a second. Here's where we can establish the rating system. Now, I like to use 0 to 4, but we could also use a 0 to 3, or we can do a 0 to 1 binary recording. Did the behavior happen or did it not? And then we would put some kind of criterion into the behavior description, because you have to have some criterion for analog behavior of the kind that we're measuring here. This has been set up for Oak Park School. Their Panther paw is the bonus code name, and I'm going to show you how that works in a second. And here is a penalty code name for infraction, and there's a separate rubric that describes how these penalty points would occur. And the positive behavior intervention support dollar, we're going to call that Panther paw. Now, you get Panther paws, additional bonus points for these different things. Now, some of this is linking to still another initiative It's called the Gulf Coast Community Foundation. They have a program called Civility Squad. It's an interesting additional program for teaching students kindness. And so I've linked TPS to that through these PAWs. But here is where we have some bonus points given for AIM behaviors, committed action initiative, and other AIM actions. And that is also detailed in a separate rubric so that teachers know how to support that. And here are penalty points. Here is where we list different functions of inappropriate behavior. There's 15 different functions. And normally we go with the four, self-stim, tangible, escape, and attention. I've expanded this to 9 different functions that are commonly observed in the school environment, and there's room for another 6. Now I'm going to go back to data entry and show you that what we would do here is let's scroll back up top, and let's say there was some challenge over here. I would say, well, maybe it was a code 4 for the antecedent, and now that becomes part of the record. And that would be code 4, which would be a teacher's request for compliance. So that gets to be entered as an antecedent. That way we now understand why there was a challenge. What were the environmental effects? Maybe something like a 5 would go there. We go back here. A 5 is inability to control a situation. And so it's a handy way to put some additional knowledge as to the antecedent conditions for appropriate behavior. Okay, data collection entry or data entry goes here, but data collection isn't necessarily a living let me try that again. It's not alive. Some teachers do enter data as it occurs into the data entry screen, but I find it better to go to the data sheet. So let's take a look at that. This is a data sheet that's customized for each student, and there's some options here. If you enter Monday's date of the school week, it gives 5 recording bands for each student. And it's printed as an individual page for each student just to demonstrate what that would look like. And so this is a data sheet for each student, and there's 12 of them. And it has each student's name at the top and their unique increasing and decreasing target behaviors. I haven't mentioned, but because this is set up for Oak Park School, everyone's got the same increasing and decreasing target behaviors. But often that's not the case when we're using TPS in other school settings. The data sheet is very handy because it could be on the clipboard. Teachers can walk around with it when they go around campus. It's also a nice hard copy of the actual data recording. They can write some notes there, and then they go back to data entry tab to enter the numbers into TPS. There are 4 different data sheets that are available, but this is the one that I prefer to use. I recommend that we use. Now, once that is done, once the student's data has been collected, and entered into TPS, that's when the magic of TPS really comes into being. So I like to say to teachers, you can just give me these numbers, we'll let TPS do the rest, and the rest is considerable. So after these data sheets, all of these other tabs are analyses, and goes on for a little bit more after that. And it would take some time to explain all these things because there are so many different graphs and analysis. I think there's 28 of them at this point, all based on the same data, but looking at things in their unique way. There's a buildup of complexity from the different tabs. The E series is showing just count of target behaviors on a binary basis. Did it occur during that recording block or not? Sometimes that's very useful. And because it's available with a series of 3, this is daily, this is weekly, and these are monthly and quarterly reports. So that's the E series. The next level of complexity takes into account opportunity. So those same counts are then divided by opportunities. TPS does not analyze or include blanks in the data, so it's always very aware of the number of recording blocks that have been used, and it only uses those quantities in the denominator in computing these percentages. So this is the percentage of occurrence. Now, for increasing targets, it's not quite as important as for decreasing targets. So this is showing the percentage of the recording blocks when each of these target behaviors occurred. That's the next step up in complexity. And then we go to the averages, and we have two different dots being displayed. We have the X's or icons displayed. We have X's and dots. The dots are the averages of all data. The X's are the averages of non-zero data. The reason why this is separated out is because zeros contribute significantly to an average, and they mean something very different than behavior that actually has occurred. If the student earned a 1, 2, 3, or 4, the behavior occurred. There's a bright line separation between that situation and if the behavior did not occur at all and the rating of 0 was earned. And so by separating the data into these two groups, dots being all data, including zeros, and X's being non-zero data, we get to see the contribution of zeros to the overall average. As we can see here, the student did earn some zeros, and that's what brought the dot down. And the X's can tell us the intensity rating of the student's behavior based solely on non-zero data. As we scroll down, we can see a much bigger difference because the student is earning more zeros for decreasing target behaviors. This is a very important measure here. It's showing that when verbal aggression occurred, it occurred at level 3. However, on a daily basis, there were a lot of zeros collected as well, so the overall average is much lower. When we go to the weekly data, we see a larger sample of data embedded in each data point, and the same representation here occurs where X's are averages without the zeros and dots are averages with all the data. And then we have the monthly and the quarterly, and it's separated here in this table. These are with zeros included and without zeros. So we get some pretty precise recording of the average performance when the behavior occurred versus all of the data recording, which would include the zeros, which would be over here, and those graphs for the monthly as well as the quarterly analyses. Quarterly dates are given by the school calendar. These are the grading periods. The next step up in analysis is the G series, which is considerably more complicated. It's based on the same data. What this is showing here is the average percentage. So on this particular day, the student Pete earned 35% of the possible rating points. Now we still have to handle the situation where there are zeros involved. So the bar, the length of the bar shows us what would happen if the student earned all ones or all fours, depending on the quantity of ratings that were not zero. That was pretty cryptic. Let me try that again. So the top of the bar is the percentage that would be earned if Pete earned all fours. And so, well, why wouldn't that be 100%? The reason why that's not at 100% is because Pete also earned some zeros. So those zeros keep the maximum rating for the non-zero values from reaching all the way to 100. Now, in these other situations here, these other days, the top of the dot is at 100%. That's because no zeros were earned. So the maximum value, maximum percentage that would be earned if Pete earned all fours would be 100%. But on these days, he earned some zeros. So even if he earned all fours for the remaining values on a daily basis, the percentage can only be at 60%. So that's what the top of the bar shows us. Turns out also mathematically the top of the bar is also the percentage of academic blocks or recording blocks when the target behavior occurred. So 60% of the recording blocks had some level of respect being shown, and the level that actually was recorded was 35% of the possible rating points. And that is, of course, represented also with our decreasing targets. And what this is showing is an overall low percentage, and that is because of all of the zeros that have been earned for these decreasing target behaviors. And then we go to weekly. Again, the bars are showing the range of possible values based on non-zero data, and monthly and quarterly. This is a very useful table because it shows the percentage of the rating on a monthly basis, the percentage of occurrence, which is when a non-zero value was recorded, and here is the average intensity based on non-zero rating. So when the target behavior occurred, what was the average rating? And we are splitting it up here, increasing targets and decreasing targets. And we have those same style graphs, and also quarterly reporting is listed just below. This being a very useful, the G3 is a very useful report. Now, just to the right here on all the graphs, you'll see these purple boxes, and anytime we can click on any of the students, and their data will then populate all tabs, all graphs in TPS. Okay, want to continue with this because I want to show some other important analyses that are available. The D1 is going to show the quantity of the ratings that were earned. So it shows that of the 70 days of data, that data were recorded, Pete earned 36 fours. He earned a 4 for 36 of the ratings that were collected. He earned a 3, 205 of the academic blocks. Pete earned a 3. He earned a 2 in 212 of the recording blocks, and so forth. And then these are expressed as percentage. So we can say that 6.7% of all of the recording blocks that were available for respect were ratings of 4. And we also have a variety of other analyses, which we won't get into. It shows us that total incidents without the 0, 511 data points were collected where there was a non-zero value. So that's just another data point that we can consider. We have the same thing for decreasing targets. This shows that for verbal aggression, for example, not quite 1% of the ratings were rated as a 3, which in this case was only 5 of the recording blocks was a 3 earned. Pete was earning a 0 most of the time. And then we can express these as percentages. This is a handy way to share data with parents in meetings. They understand this analysis to say, in other words, that for responsibility, Pete earned a 2 and a 3 and a 4 for these percentages. 43% of all the ratings were 2, 29% of all the ratings were 3, and so forth. This is a very handy tab. Here's an analysis by academic blocks, and that's very useful for doing a functional analysis. This is count of occurrence. Here's the count of the data, which says how many data points were collected. Sometimes that's important to know. Here we look at the percentage of the ratings. We want to see 100% over here and 0% over here. So this is the percentage of the possible rating points earned. If all 4s were earned, these would be 100%. So we can see where Pete is having some challenges. Here is an analysis of occurrence. That tends to be more important for the decreasing targets. So we can see verbal aggression started to pick up during the 3rd recording period. And here's an average rating without the zeros, which is a nice way of looking at the intensities of decreasing target behaviors, as well as how the student did when a non-zero value was earned. We have another tab that is pretty useful, which is to analyze the data based on days of the week. On this data set, there's not that much variation between the increasing targets and the days of the week, but it's increasingly useful um, analysis. So we see sometimes students have challenges on Mondays and Fridays, for example. So that tab would show us how that worked. And here we can see all of the students. Now, there's only one student's data in the sample file, but we can look at the average of the increasing and decreasing target behaviors for the entire file. So we have a nice way of looking at management data for the classroom. Okay, a couple other graphs that are here, and tables, but I wanted to go to this PBIS and W sum, because it's going to be a good way to relate to the AIM curriculum. Just to recall, when we look at the setup, we saw that the student can earn 3 percentage points for AIM style behaviors, any of the behaviors that were listed in the Hexaflex diagram. And we have additional documentation for teachers to attend to that. And what happens is here in data entry, if the student exhibited that particular behavior, we would put PAW 3 used diffusion uh, um, in a stressful situation, for example. We could say that. And now those 3 percentage points are going to be very valuable when we look at the W sum. The W sum is going to be the average of the increasing on a weekly basis, average of the increasing targets, average of the decreasing targets, a summary of the PAW points, such as the 3% that we just put in for using diffusion, and um, a summary of the infraction points, which would be um, uh, for some kind of inappropriate behavior that we wanted to penalize the student for. So here's how this works: is increasing targets minus decreasing plus PAW percentages minus infractions is this percentage right here. And this is a color group that we establish in setup by using these percentages and establishing these different color groups. And if a student is in the gold group, then the student gets some privileges. And this is color coded on a lanyard. So as a student walks around the school community, teachers can attend to that student because they're wearing, for example, a gold uh, lanyard. And that's a very handy way for a student to be able to communicate their performance to staff without having to say, hey, I'm at a particular percentage. Now, these percentages, which allow this level system to occur, these percentages also are converted into dollars. Those dollars are going to show up on this PBIS tab. And so this column right here, the dollar column, is linked directly to the W sum, and it is, I'm sorry, I'm looking at classroom average, but we should be looking at Pete. Um, this is an average for uh, this is a total of these averages, and these totals are converted to dollars and are linked directly to PBIS, and it's a cumulative total. And here, now to get to the point, when Pete goes to the ROAR store, as it's called, he can spend these dollars on various items of importance. And when the dollars are spent, let's say there was $100 spent on with some set of items, the teacher would enter that here, and it will now update the students' totals um, for their checkbook, basically. So all of the percentages for the increasing and decreasing targets are computed to form this sum here, and those are converted into dollars for the student to spend. We don't have the rest of this populated, but this is a running total of all of the percentage points that they have earned minus what they have spent, and that is coming from, in this case, Pete is coming from his total percentages for the week based on the average of his increasing and minus his decreasing plus his paw dollars, Panther paw dollars, minus his infraction percentages. And so it's a really great way to connect ongoing performance into a token economy without having to have any physical dollars being distributed around, which is it's a disruptive thing to have to stop the class and hand out these dollars. So it links directly to this, and it allows the students to now see how their percentages accumulate in a checkbook style system, and they can spend those dollars as they wish at any time. And it updates the totals. Okay, gosh, there's still so much more. I'm just going to click on this here. We can look at all of Pete's notes. It is very handy to annotate the graphs. It puts the dates, the recording period, detail, and the actual note that was listed. Here, TPS writes an IEP goal based on the current performance of Pete. And so we can see here, these goals are already written, as well as 3 objectives based on his current performance. And we can copy that and paste that into a document. It's really handy. So that way the IEP plan and the social emotional component of that IEP links directly to a TPS goal, which of course links directly to TPS data. Okay, that was a very fast review of all of this. I'd love to talk to you some more about this, Dr. Dixon. I think this is a very close representation of the style and the intent of the data sheets that are in the AIM book. I can really see this working well. I'd love to have you to collaborate with you. I spoke to the principal of Oak Park today. She was absolutely delighted that you had responded to the email. These are very exciting times in Sarasota County. There's much more being done in terms of the systems integration. Going back to that diagram, there are a lot of other systems that are being incorporated into this plan. It's very exciting work. I hope that this hasn't been too laborious going through all these TPS tabs, but wanted to give you a full sense of the power of TPS and the potential for it in terms of collaborating with AIM. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with you.